found on page 825. Again, Matthew 20:17 through 28. And as Jesus was going up to Jerusalem, he took the 12 disciples aside, and on the way he said to them, "See, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him over to the Gentiles to be mocked and flogged and crucified, and he will be raised on the third day." Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee came up to him with her sons, and kneeling before him, she asked him something. And he said to her, "What do you want?" And she said to him, "Say that these 2 sons of mine are to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left hand, in your kingdom." Jesus answered, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I am to drink?" They said to him, "We are able." He said to them, "You will drink my cup, but to sit at my right hand and to sit at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared by my Father." And when the 10 had heard it, they were indignant at the 2 brothers. But Jesus called them to him and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be the first among you must be your slave. Even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." This is God's word for us today.
I asked my 4-year-old son, Haddon, what he wants to be when he grows up this past week. And he said that he wants to be a fireman and a police officer. Pretty cool. But I did have to inform him those are actually 2 different jobs. I imagine it'd be hard to do both of them at the same time. And so he's like, okay, well then I'll be a fireman first, and then I'll be a police officer. So there's that. But he did add something. He's like, but okay, here's the thing, Dad. When I grow up, I'm going to be so huge and so strong that I'm going to actually need like the big police SUV, not like a normal sized police car. He's like, because if I sat in a normal police car, I would crush it to pieces. So there's that. Now, my sweet son Haddon cannot even zip up his own jacket because it's too hard for him to do. It's like requires too much muscle. So there's, we'll see how this works out for him. But you just got to love that self-confident optimism of children. Yeah, this is what I'm going to do. But we as a church, we're continuing through the Gospel of Matthew. This week, here in Matthew chapter 20, Jesus wants to talk to us about what true greatness looks like. What does it mean to be truly great? We often think like Haddon, maybe not so brazenly, but we think like that. We think true greatness is found in power, it's found in strength, and we also think, and we're probably on our way there, if we do say so ourselves. But when we hear what Jesus has to say to us in this passage, it might actually cause us to pause and slow down a little bit before we actually ask to become great or to desire that. We have 3 points from today's passage. And again, that passage being Matthew chapter 20, verses 17 to 28. I invite you to turn there if you haven't already. And those 3 points from this passage are: first, greatness predicted; second, greatness prepared; and third, greatness performed. And so with that passage in front of you, I invite you to look first there at verses 17 to 19. There in verses 17 to 19, we have Jesus' third and most detailed prediction about what's waiting for him in Jerusalem. So just picture this for a moment. Imagine that you're one of the 12 disciples. You are headed to Jerusalem with Jesus for the Passover celebration. This is very usual. You're expecting to go to the Passover feast. You're getting closer to the city. And then Jesus all of a sudden pulls you aside and he tells you, by the way, this is going to be my last visit with you to Jerusalem because I'm going to be murdered there. And you're thinking to yourself that, you're assuming that the Passover lamb is going to be sacrificed just like you've been doing since you were a kid. This is very normal. But now Jesus is telling you that this year, he's the Passover lamb who's going to be sacrificed. And just notice the incredible detail that Jesus knows about what's waiting for him. So he knows the who, the what, the where, the when, and the how about his own murder, about his death that's coming. So look again there at verses 18 and 19. He knows that the Jewish leaders are the one who's going to condemn him to death, and that's going to happen in a mock trial. He knows that they don't have the authority to carry out that execution, and so they're going to hand him over to the Gentiles who do have the authority to do that. And then even just look at the verbs in verse 19. Jesus knows exactly what they're going to do to him. It says mock, flog, and then finally crucify. This is actually the very first time that the word crucify appears in the entire Bible, right here. So Jesus is getting very specific. He knows exactly that. He just doesn't know just that he's going to be murdered. He, in fact, knows how he's going to be murdered. And I think we all know that feeling of being anxious about the future, about something that's coming up. Maybe you're a student, you got a math test coming up, or finals, or the ACT, or whatever. Maybe you've faced down the MCAT before, whatever that might be. Maybe you got a project at work coming or something there. We know this feeling. A couple of the ones that really get me is one, if you have a surgery coming up, I hate that feeling, the feeling of knowing there's that. Or if you have to stand up and talk in front of people, that also gets me, believe it or not. Yeah, the anxiety's there. I used to be so afraid. I'm sorry if you've heard me say this before. I'll say it again, though. I used to be so afraid of talking in front of people that there was one time in middle school they were doing a spelling bee, a school-wide spelling bee, and every class needed someone to represent them for that class. And so the way they worked out who would be the representative, was that the teacher had everybody stand up. The teacher gives a word, and then you just got to go around and spell that word, and it goes, it keeps going. And if you get one of those words wrong, you just sit down. And at the end, one person's going to be left standing. And then we did that, and all of a sudden I looked around the room, and I realized I was the last person standing, and I wanted to kick myself in the head for being so dumb about this choice. Such a horrible decision. And so the spelling bee came a couple weeks later, and I was so nervous that I got sick, and then the runner-up had to take my place. And so I'd been never happier to be sick before, actually. But can you just imagine, knowing that the leaders of your nation, they're going to lie about you, they are going to beat you half to death, they're going to strip you naked, they're going to do that in front of in the nation's capital, in front of a bunch of people. They're going to spit on you. They're going to curse you. And then they're eventually going to lay you on a pole, drive nails through your wrists and your feet until you suffocate to death. He knows all of that. He knows all of the details about what's coming. And yet, what do we see Jesus doing here? Look again at those first 8 words of verse 17. It says, "And as Jesus was going up to Jerusalem." It's so easy to read those 8 words and just sort of breeze over it like it's like a travel update. But Jesus is heading up to Jerusalem very clearly. I couldn't bring myself to represent my class in the spelling bee. Jesus, he knows, however, that his people need a representative. They need someone who is going to stand in their place, take the punishment that we deserve for our sin, and die in our place. He knows we need that representative. And so it just says, Jesus is going to Jerusalem. He isn't blinking. He's not hesitating. He is walking. And actually, even more than that, what is actually Jesus doing in verses 17 to 19? Well, I think it's safe to say that what he's doing is he's loving his disciples. He wants to make sure that they are aware of what's waiting for them when they get to Jerusalem this time around. He wants to make sure that they're ready for it as much as possible. He wants to give them the greatest shot at responding wisely to what's about to happen. He's marching into the worst nightmare that you can imagine, but what he's thinking about in this moment is how he can best serve and love his 12 closest disciples. This is one of the markers of true greatness. True greatness isn't that Jesus is just going to walk into Jerusalem and destroy some evil people, which he could do if he wanted to, but he is going to allow those evil people to destroy him. He's going to watch his closest friends desert him, and he's going to do all of that because he loves them. But there's actually something even more astonishing about this. So for the Passover celebration, in the law of Moses, it says that they would choose the sacrificial lamb, that spotless lamb. They would choose that lamb for the Passover sacrifice about 5 days in advance to get ready for it. But 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 19 to 20 says that Jesus chose to be the perfect sacrifice for our sins before God even spoke the world into existence. So Jesus not only chose to create the world anyways, but he also chose to be born into that sinful, broken world so that he could then come to this day where he would then make one final trip to Jerusalem. True greatness, we can say, is walking into suffering, knowing full well what waits for you, but going anyways out of love. That's what Jesus is doing here. And if we're being honest with ourselves, it's pretty rare that we're able to embrace this type of greatness. This is not how we normally think. It really does go against everything in us. Not many of us take a job because we're like, oh, this will be a really hard job. Maybe I won't even be paid well. It's like, that's not how we normally think. We don't think, we don't get married because we're like, I need to be sanctified. Or like, we don't have kids because we're like, I think I'm still selfish, so let's have another one. Like, that's not what we normally do. We don't get to know our neighbors so that they can feel free to knock on our door when they got trouble, maybe to even be late at night if we're lucky. We don't usually befriend people because we're like, oh, they look really needy. This is not how we normally think. How we normally think, we do see it on display in this passage. It's not as much from Jesus. Look at instead at verses 20 to 23. Jesus gets done detailing how he's going to be brutally murdered. And then the mother of James and John comes up with her 2 boys, and she kneels before Jesus. And notice Jesus' simple question to her in verse 21. He asks her, what do you want? What do you want? Those are 4 little words. I do think, though, if you allow those 4 words to pierce into your heart, they will. They can. They can really pierce through a lot if you allow Jesus to just ask you that question and think on it for a minute. What is it that you desire? Because he's not really saying it like, what do you want, right? It's like, what do you want? Well, you're here, what do you want? You want something. What is it that you think your life needs exactly? What is it that you're seeking after that you think is going to give you happiness and security and fulfillment? What is it that you want that is going to make you feel like your life really counted for something? What do you want? Maybe you've been trying some different pursuits, but here you are still asking yourself this question. What is it that you want out of life? What do you feel like you need to really feel like you've done something and now you can be at peace with yourself? If Jesus were to take you to Panera after service this morning and sit across the table from you and to ask you, what do you want? What would you say to him if you were being completely honest? If you were being completely honest with him, what would you say? Moms know best, of course, though, right? So mom here has her answer is ready. Look at verse 21. She says, say that these 2 sons of mine are to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your kingdom. It's interesting that, sometimes, I'm sure we've seen this before, but sometimes as parents, we do our best in life and we try to give our kids the best that we can, but there's maybe sometimes more that we wish we could have done ourselves, and it's almost like we can start to live through our kids. That can happen at times, or their success becomes our success. Our hopes, we hope, will become their hopes, right? And this dynamic can start to happen. But we have to remember that as she asked this for her sons to sit at Jesus' right hand and his left hand on thrones, we have to remember what Jesus had already said just shortly before this back in chapter 19, verse 28. So if you remember in chapter 19, verse 28, Jesus is talking to his 12 disciples and he told them this. He said, you're going to sit on 12 thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Your boss has maybe promised you a promotion at work before. That's cool. That's nothing compared to what Jesus just promised for these guys. I mean, that really puts that into comparison, doesn't it? You're going to sit on 12 thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. It's like, wow, that's kind of like just an offhanded comment, like, by the way, like that's pretty cool. But that's not good enough for these 2 boys. It's just not good enough. James and John, they were two of Jesus' first disciples. They, along with Peter, were some of Jesus' closest friends. They had just an especially close relationship with him, but it's clear that they're just not satisfied with their lot in life. They want to make sure that their 2 thrones are slightly higher and closer than the other 10 thrones. That is what they need. So their honest answer to Jesus' question, their honest answer is often the same as ours. Jesus asks, "What do you want?" And we very often respond and say, "Just a little bit more. Just a little bit more." And when does that stop? It's unknown. The human heart can probably say that forever. James chapter 4, verse 3. You ask and you don't receive. Why? Because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. It is so easy to fall into thinking just like Adam and Eve did in the garden, like what we see here as well. We imagine that despite the 10,000 good things that the Lord's already given to us, that there is surely this one thing out there that if we could get a hold of it, then we would be truly happy and satisfied. Jeremiah chapter 45, verse 5 says, "Do you seek great things for yourself? Seek them not." Dear mom, of course, she has no clue what she's really asking for, because I think if she did know what she was asking for, she would probably have never asked for it in the first place. Jesus is so patient and gentle with them, though, so he asks them a question here in response. Look at verse 22. He says, "Are you able to drink the cup that I am to drink?" So they ask a question. Now he's going to ask them a question. He wants to start clarifying things for them a little bit. And his question here, it reminds me of the time when I tiled my shower during COVID in 2020. We were living up in Waupun. That's where I was serving as a youth pastor. And we were all locked in our houses. One weekend, I thought to myself, you know what? I'll tile our shower. It was a Friday, and we had one bathroom in the house. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to run to the store real quick. I'll buy the tile, the mortar, the grout, the cement board, everything you need. I'll do all that. I'll demo this thing, and I'll get this wrapped up within a day. It's like a weekend project, a quick little thing. It's going to be great. I mean, you can hop on, you guys are laughing, you know how this goes. Yeah, you can hop on social media and watch someone demo and remodel their entire bathroom in a 30-second clip, right? And I had done some tiling before, okay? So feeling pretty good about it. But 35 hours of work later, I was soaking wet. I was covered in dust, and flecks of ceramic were all over my face. I was still on my knees, huddled over my bathtub, and I was just thinking about how we needed to get a hotel room or burn the house down, either one. I was open to either option at that point. If you need help tiling at your house, just let me know. I'll bring a match. All right, it's very easy, right? It's so easy to overestimate our own abilities, our maturity. It's so easy to do that. We do this all the time. Jesus knows that about us. And by the way, when Jesus asked them this question, "Hey, can you drink the cup that I'm to drink?" Who knows exactly what they think that means? Maybe they have a little clue about it, maybe not. I mean, who knows what they're really thinking? I'm not sure exactly. But either way, they answer confidently, "We're able." "Can you drink the cup?" "Yes." No qualifications, no hesitations, just a very simple, in Greek, it's one word, yes. Yes, we can, absolutely. In reality, the cup that Jesus is referring to here is a cup filled with God's wrath. So a good cross-reference here would be Psalm 75, verse 8. Psalm 75, verse 8 says, "For in the hand of the Lord there's a cup with foaming wine, well mixed, and he pours out from it, and all the wicked of the earth shall drain it down to the dregs." So this cup is filled with God's righteous anger at our sin, and Jesus is going to drink that cup down to the very last drop for us. And he's going to do that because he loves us and because he knows this is the only way that we're going to be made right with God. And so he's going to take that cup off of our table, that cup that we should have had to drink ourselves. He's going to take it off of our table. He's going to put it to his lips. He's going to drink until that cup is completely dry. And he's going to do that. for us. And so this mom and her two boys, they love to think about Jesus sitting victorious on the throne, which is actually partly true. Like, Jesus is going to sit on a throne, but they sort of gloss over the whole part about the cross that's going to come before the crown. And this is just human nature. Martin Luther, he said that the flesh ever seeks to be glorified before it's crucified. We love the idea of this glory thing, but this whole crucifixion thing on the way there, that we don't want to think about as much. And when I read this conversation between Jesus and these two boys here and their moms there, when I read that, I can't help but think about my own desire to become a pastor. This would have been maybe back in like 2009 or something like that. I saw like pastors open up the Bible and preach, and I thought to myself, yeah, that's what I want to do. That's awesome. I imagine that being a pastor basically meant you studied the Bible all week. You preached on Sunday, you did a couple other little things, and you're basically paid to pray. Paid to pray. It's awesome. But I can imagine Jesus asking 18-year-old me, so do you think you can be a pastor? And I said, yes. Yes, I can. Matthew Henry says, those are commonly most confident that are least acquainted with the cross. I wonder if for you this morning, is following Jesus requiring more of you than you maybe at first thought it would? Is Jesus requiring more of you than you even imagined it might? But Jesus is extremely patient with us. He is very patient with us and our overestimation of our own abilities. Have you ever noticed how God doesn't tell you everything about your life all at once? He doesn't like dump the whole thing on you all at once. He doesn't tell you every detail about what following him is going to cost you, because that would just be too much for us to bear if we had to take that all on all at once. He's slow and he's patient with us. I mean, imagine if Frodo knew everything that would be required of him if he stepped out of Bag End with that ring, like he didn't know all of that all at once. Would he have gone anyways? Maybe. Bilbo had a little bit better, a little older, wiser. Bilbo had a better idea of it. That's why he told him, right? It's a dangerous business, Frodo, going out your door. Like, be careful. It's a dangerous thing to ask Jesus to make you great. Be careful. Be careful with that. If you pray for Jesus to make you great, you also might want to pray for the grace that you're going to need to bear the cross on the way there. How often do we ask Jesus for something and he could say to us the same thing he said to these two boys? He could say, you don't know what you're asking. You don't fully realize what you are asking. Again, though, Jesus is so patient with James and John. He is patient with us. Because let's be honest, what's on display in this passage is these two brothers, they're not here so we can say it. They're being like prideful knuckleheads, right? They are prideful. They did not win the Christian of the Year award this year, right? In this passage, probably not. But what does Jesus say to them in verse 23? He says, you will drink my cup. And Jesus' answer here in verse 23 to them, his answer actually gives me a lot of hope. Jesus is saying, in part, he's saying that these two guys, they are going to serve Jesus in some really big ways. They're gonna. And that includes, by the way, they are going to suffer for Jesus. In Acts chapter 12, verses 1-2, we read that James, one of the guys here, asking Jesus for this favor, we read that James was put to death with the sword by King Herod. He's one of the very first of the 12 to die. James drank the cup of suffering, not because he was guilty in any way, but because he was being prepared for glory. And Jesus told him as much in advance with just very minimal detail. And what about John, the other brother? We know that he, it seems, died at a good old age. But church history tells us that was only after being unsuccessfully boiled alive. And then Revelation chapter 1 verse 9 says that he was exiled onto the island of Patmos to sort of hopefully be just forgotten about until the end of his days. So he could just sort of die quietly and not bother people anymore with talking about Jesus. 1 Peter 4:13 says, rejoice insofar as you share Christ's sufferings, that you may also rejoice and be glad when his glory is revealed. These brothers are going to have the privilege of both suffering for Jesus and being glorified with Jesus. And by the way, did you notice how Jesus doesn't even say no to their request? Look again at what he said there in verse 23. He said, to sit at my right hand and at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it's been prepared by my Father. So he didn't even really say no to them. It could be the two of them, for all we know, that actually is sitting at his left and right. It might be. But he's saying that greatness isn't really something you pursue as much as something you're prepared for. God used these prideful and sinful men in really amazing ways, but that was only through great humiliation. And the reason I have hope about that is because if these knuckleheads for the Lord can do great things for the Lord, then maybe the Lord could use people like me and people like you. These guys are not exactly all-stars, at least not how they started out. But whatever life has in store for you and me, we can and we should see it as coming from the hand of our Heavenly Father. That's what Jesus just said here, didn't he? He said, this is going to be for those who my Father's prepared. My Father has a preparation that he's doing. He has a plan in place for everybody, and including for those that'll sit on the left and the right. Your lot in life comes from the hand of your Father in heaven, who loves you and cares for you and who prepares for you. It's so easy to look at the opportunities, the circumstances of other people's lives, and maybe to imagine that maybe we're more worthy of it than they are. Maybe we would handle it better than they're handling it, whatever it could be. It's easy to, for me to drive by other church buildings and see huge buildings with hundreds of cars in the parking lot, gorgeous playgrounds off the side, and all the opportunities that they have. And I could easily wonder why the Lord hasn't given us some of those same things. But isn't that, if you drill down, is that not a prideful thought? Could it be the case that if we had the ministry opportunities of others, that we would possibly compromise and then actually be less effective than we are right now? That's possible. We could be less faithful than we are right now. We don't know. We have to trust the hand of our Father. There's this danger of actually going backwards by moving upwards, and we don't like to think about that danger very often. We just assume up, and away. That's the better thing to do. Jesus needs to be great, so I need to be great, right? It's good. Like, we can do this thing together. We want to be somebody. But John the Baptist is one of the greatest men to ever live, and he had it right when he said, Jesus must increase, but I must decrease. The good portion for your life is whatever your Heavenly Father prepares for you. That's the good portion. And it's oftentimes not what we would have chosen for ourselves, but the thing is that we can trust the one who gives it to us. It comes from that same Father in heaven who sent his one and only Son to die and to ransom you from the path we've chosen for ourselves, that self-chosen path of sin and death. The Father who ransomed us from that is the same Father who prepares our lot for us. And if the Lord entrusts something big to you or something little, either way, we can say the same thing Paul says in 2 Corinthians 2:16. He says, who's sufficient for these things? Even in the small things, we are not sufficient. We need the Lord's grace even in those. But James and John, they're not the only two guys who aren't seeing this clearly. Look at the response of the other 10 in verse 24. It says, when the 10 heard it, they hear this conversation between Mom, the boys, and Jesus, and it says they were indignant at the two brothers. I hate to admit how often that I get angry at something, and it's not because I'm like, that's sinful and bad and dishonors God. I'm more like, that's bad and I'm angry about it because it like dishonors me or it like triggers my pride, right? That's really, they're not upset at James's and John's pride. They're upset about their own pride. That's really what's going on here. Like, how dare you ask that and wiggle in front, right? And then all the infighting starts. And Jesus, again, is so kind and so patient and so long-suffering with these guys. Look at verse 25. It says that he calls them all to himself. He's like, okay, guys, time for a team huddle. Everybody come around. Like, shh, quiet. Come around. Let's talk for a sec. And he doesn't yell at them. He doesn't even yell at them or scold them, even though they're just like 12 guys who are all jockeying for position and prestige. Instead, look at verse 25. He tells them instead to look out at the rulers of the world. He said, lift up your eyes for a sec, look around. What do you see? You see leaders who are using people to prop themselves up. They use people, and then when people have served their purposes, they sort of cast them aside. That's what we see. They're putting themselves above others. It's like in World War I on the Western Front, where there's British soldiers and German soldiers. They're fighting each other, trench warfare. But then on Christmas of 1914, there was an unofficial ceasefire that just sort of happened. And the soldiers started coming up out of their trenches. They exchanged gifts. They play some football. They sing Christmas carols together. But the leaders caught wind of it, and they ordered the men back to their trenches to resume the killing. And they put in some procedures for next year to ensure that it never happened again. This is the world we live in. This world measures greatness based on how many people serve you. Jesus says that true greatness is found in how many people, rather, you serve. That is the measure of true greatness. The issue here isn't authority itself, of whether authority should be exercised, but rather the means, the motives of that authority. The more insecure a leader is, the more likely they are to use their power selfishly. But here's Jesus. He's standing alone in the history of the world as the King of Kings, the leader of all leaders, and he is becoming a servant of his creation in order to die and purchase sinners like us. This is the greatness of Jesus. And none of us can ever repeat what Jesus did. It's sort of like a one-time, job slot, and he fulfilled it for us. So we can't do what he did, but we can become more like him. And that's actually what he is calling us to do. In fact, what Jesus did for us, although we don't repeat it, it is still our motivation to joyfully and willingly make ourselves even slaves of one another, as Jesus says here. He uses that powerful word to make ourselves slaves of others. Because notice those first two words in verse 28. Here's the connection. Even as. You do this, even as I did this. There's a connection here about what we do and our posture in this world and what Jesus did and his posture in this world. We're afraid that if we humble ourselves, we're afraid that if we become the slaves of others, that they might actually take advantage of us. You've maybe heard it said that it's one thing to think of yourself as a servant. It's a whole nother thing when people start actually treating you like a servant, right? Those are quite different. Like it starts to get more and more difficult. So how on earth are we supposed to do this? How are we supposed to embrace and begin practicing the greatness of Christ? I think we can ask ourselves two questions that'll really help us with this. There's two questions that the more confident we are about the answer to these two questions, the more confident that we're going to be in being able to embrace this cross-centered greatness of Jesus. And the first question that you should ask yourself is, how much are you worth? What is your worth? We see the answer in verse 28. Jesus said again, the Son of Man came to give his life as a ransom for many. So even if people really do treat you like a servant, even the worst treatment you would face cannot erase how Jesus has treated you. Jesus served you with his very life. No matter how low you're willing to make yourself, you will never go so low that Jesus can't raise you back up just as he has and just as he will, even out of the grave and into glory. He is going to do that. And that means we can embrace whatever self-sacrifice that love requires of us today. We can embrace changing diapers or caring for aging parents or cleaning church toilets, right? We can embrace this because our worth is secure. It is secure and immovable and inestimable. Our worth has been paid for in the blood of Christ. This is who we are. We've been ransomed by Christ. And so if that's what you're worth, then the second question is, what's Jesus worth? Is Jesus worth embracing this kind of greatness? Is he worth it? If you were to fast forward to Matthew chapter 27, verse 56, getting towards the end of this gospel, here in about 7 chapters, in Matthew 27, 56, Jesus is hanging dead, crucified on the cross, and it says, there's this little note, this little offhanded comment, that this mom is standing there in front of Jesus. James and John's mom is standing there. And as she's looking at Jesus hanging dead, crucified, instead of her boys being lifted up on Jesus' right and left, it says that there are 2 other men who were crucified on the right and left of Jesus. And I wonder what was going through her mind as she was standing there. I wonder if she was going over this conversation right here and starting to see it in a whole new light. I wonder if she was starting to realize what true greatness is. That if Jesus did that for us, that maybe, just maybe, he won't fail to give us any good thing that the Father's prepared for us. And maybe she's starting to realize that even when following Jesus means that you give much, we can always be confident that we've been given more because we've been given Jesus.